could you talk about the significance of these developments? Because you've called what Germany has been found to be planning an attack on the Crimea Bridge, which has happened several times before. Now it's regularly attacked during this conflict, whether through mysterious terrorist events or directly by Ukraine. And what was found, of course, was that Germany was planning to help Ukraine, not just with missiles, but with the planning of an attack on the bridge. There's also revelations that British personnel are in Ukraine, helping to do very similar things. So the significance of this, Scott, and what do you think the fallout will be from these developments moving forward?
Well, I think the first thing is in order to talk about this, you have to visualize, what it takes to get policy momentum. And the reason why I say that is, the United States took Victoria Nuland driven American policy, took a very aggressive stance on Ukraine at a time when, for instance, Emmanuel Macron was saying that he doesn't want Europe to be caught in a war between two superpowers, the United States and Russia. And he was talking about, the need for a European security framework that was sort of liberated from this American pressure. And so Macron was not somebody who was saying, we're going to send troops to Ukraine. He was the opposite, saying, we don't want to push for this conflict. Germany, look, Germany was like, we're happy with the energy. Keep it coming, keep it coming, keep it coming kind of thing. And, we'll work, we'll play stupid games with Minsk and all that, but we're not leaning forward for a conflict with Ukraine either. The United States is leaning forward very heavily. When you think about policy shifts, all that, imagine a giant ship, a container ship. To get it going, because there's a lot of weight, you have to point it in a direction, and then you have to slowly build up a head of steam. And once it gets going in the water, you ain't turning that thing around quickly. I mean, making major shifts isn't easy. You have to move this mass, and you can move in incremental, but you're generally speaking to be going the same direction. So once you get foreign policy or national security policy together and moving, there's a mass. There's political mass. There's economic mass. There's domestic political. There's diplomatic, economic. All this is moving in one direction. Everything's working together. And so what the United States was doing for a couple of years was getting France and Germany to go from this direction and move them in this direction. And we finally got it. I mean, look, the Germans didn't want to send Leopard tanks. They didn't want to send Marder vehicles. Now they did. They didn't. The French didn't want to send the Caesar artillery. They did. We from 2022 to 2023, we got Europe in this direction with the counteroffensive, and they doubled down on that. They threw more coal into the engine, and off they went. This is the direction they're going. Ukrainian victory, because America's there leading the way. Meanwhile, America is sitting there going, this counteroffensive ain't working. Now they want F-16s. Holy cow. We're heading in a direction where, we're not going to win. This is going to be horrible. And so we started pulling back and slowing down our momentum. And then we start moving. Meanwhile, France and Germany are up doing this. And what's happened right now is that we have a situation where the French and the Germans are leaning way forward. So are the British, because we told them to lean way forward. They're doing things. The French and the British have been providing the British the Storm Shadow, the French the Scalp missile. These are air-delivered cruise missiles. They worked to get the Su-24s, which are a Soviet-era, fighter bomber. They got them modified so you can not only mount the missile, but you have the avionics inside linked up with the electronics to receive the intelligence package that comes in about where enemy air defense is, where their radars are. All that gets turned into a flight profile for the missile so it can go in and hit the target. And this flight profile is updated after the plane takes off. It'll go up and get a final update. That's why we have reconnaissance assets flying all over the place. And then they launch and they do attack plan. The people planning that attack plan and doing all the electronics aren't Ukrainian. They're British. or they're French. And many of them are on the ground, loading in the pre-stuff, making everything work. All the Ukrainians do is fly and hit some toggles and push a button. But all the other stuff is done by the French and the British. Why? They're leaning forward. That's their contribution. They're leaning forward. And these missiles are striking targets in Crimea, in addition to targets in in the Russian rear area. The Germans have been pressured now to provide the Taurus missile. It supposedly has more capability, greater range than the Scalp or the Storm Shadow. But the Germans are running into a problem because, as you learned from listening to this tape, the Su-24 can't do it. It would have to be extensively modified, and then the Germans would have to put guys on the ground to do the same thing that the British and the French are doing on the ground, to serve as that middleman to get all the data loaded in, up running. You'd need a German team on the ground, and there's not supposed to be German troops on the ground there, so they don't want to have German troops on the ground. And then the Germans would have to be actively involved in targeting, and they talk about targeting. This isn't Ukrainians talking about taking down the Crimea Bridge. This is the Germans doing targeting of a Russian critical piece of Russian infrastructure. Now, there's a couple things here. Some people say that what's wrong with that, Scott? The Russians are bombing critical Ukrainian infrastructure. I mean, fair's play, right? If this was purely a Russian-Ukrainian conflict, I guess you could say that. Fair's fair. But it's not. I don't think people remember or understand what's going on in NATO. For instance, if a Leopard tank breaks down, it's removed from Ukraine to Poland and sent probably to Lithuania, where there's a Leopard refitting facility where they repair the Leopard tank to bring it back into. Now, in normal warfare, that place would be bombed. It wouldn't exist anymore because it's participant in the conflict. In Poland, there's intelligence centers there where you have analysts coming together, or in Ramstein, they're doing the same thing. Logistics flows into Germany, into Polish warehouses on. In wartime, none of this would be allowed to exist. Russia would be hitting it. Ukraine is getting this huge benefit by having all of Europe to be this safe haven where their logistics, where they can train, where they can build weaponry, where stockpiles can be built up and all this stuff, and then filtered into Ukraine. But Russia can't attack that. So the idea of saying, no, it's a good thing to let Ukraine attack the Kerch Bridge. It's a bad thing to let Ukraine attack the Kerch Bridge, because what you're encouraging is war. And war means that Russia is going to attack all that stuff in NATO, and then we have a bigger problem. So I don't think people understand just how much of Russia's fighting this war with a hand tied behind its back, because it can't do the things that it would normally do to disrupt the flow of logistics and combat support that's coming from NATO, from the safe haven, into Ukraine. So we've got that. But then it's the Germans planning it. This isn't active aggression. Germany's not at war with Russia. They're not. I mean, they're participants in the conflict, apparently, but they're not at war. So what Germany's doing right now, and it's not me, and people are, Scott, you're just throwing words out there. I don't know. Saxony happens to be a German state, and the Saxon government has initiated Article 13 charges, which is basically the German constitution that prohibits people from engaging in acts, wars of aggression. Well, why are wars of aggression such a sensitive thing? I don't know. Maybe because the Nazis, they were Germans, by the way, in World War II, carried out a war of aggression against Europe and the Soviet Union. 27 million Soviets were killed. And when the war ended, I think it was Justice Jackson, American Supreme Court jurist who was a prosecutor at Nuremberg. He said the greatest crime, the greatest war crime of them all is a war of aggression, because from that, all other crimes take place. And German politicians, diplomats, and soldiers were hung by the neck until dead for committing the crime of a war of aggression. So the Germans rightfully said at the time, we don't ever want to be in that situation again. But here they are, 4 German officers planning a war of aggression against Russia, whom they're not at war with. Now, imagine meeting the Russians and getting this tape and listening to it, going, Now, the Russians, I think, nothing took them by surprise. First of all, I don't think this was Russian intelligence. I'll tell you why. I used to be in the intelligence business, and if I were able to successfully tap into the communications of 4 German Air Force officers who were giving away the farm, they gave away everything in this conversation. The last thing I'd want to do is compromise that. I'd want to say, I want to do this again and again and again. Now that I know how to get in there, I want to repeat this. The other thing that happens is when you do something like this, you don't leave a sign that, Kilroy was here, the old World War II thing, apparently this was a WEX or something like that.
Yeah, it was a
thing.
very basic WebEx system. Yeah.
Yeah. But apparently, in addition to the 4 Germans, somebody else logged in and was hanging out there. And it was obvious there's somebody hanging out here who doesn't belong here. That's not how intelligence services work. You don't leave telltale signs. If you're in there, and nobody knows about it, so that they speak freely. It just shows you the low level of communication security. Password 1234. A tough one, guys. Even I could break that one. So this happened. I think basically it wasn't Russian intelligence that did this. This was some sort of intelligence affiliated hacker, or because in Russia they do. We know this outside of in Moscow at various universities. There's groups of civilian hackers that are doing it sort of, Putin calls them Russian patriots, and they're supervised by intelligence guys who are interested in what successes have you had, what have you done, but it's not a Russian intelligence, because the Russian intelligence guys have their own tools, their own tradecraft, and they're not going to compromise that. They're not going to let these civilian hackers know. The civilian hackers are going and doing their own thing. And I think basically somebody was sitting there floating around and whatever and going, let's see, I'm in. They're letting me stay in. They're talking, record. Holy cow, look at what they're talking about. And it, from what I understand from Margarita Simeon, who's the editor-in-chief of RT, who received this and who published this, there's more of this. So I think that the Germans, and they say including Schultz, there's conversations that have been going on in this WebEx thing that this hacking group has gained access to, and she has access to. Russian intelligence would never give Margarita Simeon highly classified intelligence, because you burn the source. If this was Russian intelligence, we wouldn't know anything about it. The Russians are reticent. It's not like the United States that has a tradition of intelligence being leaked by politicians. I mean, you don't have to have a security clearance, ladies and gentlemen. Just read Washington, D.C. newspapers when something's happening, and you might as well have a top secret SCI clearance, because you're gaining access to top secret SCI information, because that's how America works. If you remember that leak when the stupid kid put all that stuff on the internet, he put it in Minecraft or something like that. He just pled guilty to the crime. That Massachusetts National Guard guy. Ladies and gentlemen, you read it. You had, for a while there, for a moment, a brief shiny moment, you had the highest security clearances in the land, because you were reading top secret code word material. And guess what? It's not that good. And in many cases, it's wrong, because it's the analysis derived from intelligence that was collected using top secret code word resources. It's not necessarily the information that's classified, it's how we gathered the information. And so if I'm the analyst and I'm gathering bits and pieces of information and I put it together in a product, and that product is crap, meaning that I got it all wrong, I didn't guess right, but there's facts in there, that's still going to be classified top secret code word. And so if you make the mistake of thinking, oh, because it's top secret code word, it has to be good, it has to be accurate, not really. Many times it's just pure unadulterated crap. As much of that stuff that the kid put out there was. But the Russians don't play that game. You don't see the Russians leaking top secret information. The Russians, I think, are pretty poor at information warfare in terms of trying to use the release of information to to change policy. This leak by Margarita Simeone, however, is a deviation from that. It's genius, but I think it's because they got lucky enough to tap into a source of information that isn't protected by the security classifications of the real Russian intelligence service, and instead made their way so that by releasing it, you're not compromising anything. And it's embarrassing to the Germans. But what the Germans did here was an act of war. Here's the other big thing about what the Germans did. Germany is supposed to be a democracy, and civil military relations is sort of what defines a democracy. You guys know the concept. The president is the civilian. He's the commander in chief. And if he orders a general to do something, the general does it. General can't say no unless it's an unlawful order. The general has to obey the orders. And the policy is made by the president, not by the generals. The generals advise on this. NATO, when we were talking about expanding NATO, one of the key things that had to be driven into these former communist bloc nations is the notion of civilian control of the military, absolute civilian control of the military. Germany, when it unified, had to be retrained in this, and supposedly they learned that was the case. But here we have a situation where the chancellor, who's the highest civilian executive of Germany, has said he doesn't support sending Taurus missiles to Ukraine. And the German parliament, sort of the ultimate expression of legislative authority in Germany, not once but twice, has voted overwhelmingly to reject sending the Taurus missile to Ukraine. So the civilian leadership has spoken. The executive and the legislative branch, there's no difference of opinion, no Taurus to Ukraine. So why do you have German officers who clearly state that they're acting with the knowledge of the defense minister, plotting an attack on the Crimea bridge using the Taurus missile, knowing that they would have to deploy it there and deploy secret people and all this stuff? Now you hear them saying, well, it isn't going to happen. It's unrealistic, going to be difficult, da-da-da. But why are they engaged in that to begin with? It's one thing for them to say, well, this is a contingency plan just in case they say, how do we get these missiles to Ukraine? But they weren't talking about how we get these missiles to Ukraine. They're talking about how do we use these missiles to attack Russia. That's Ukraine's business, not Germany's business. Germany has no business planning an attack against Russian infrastructure. That's an act of aggression. That's a war of aggression. And so what we're seeing here is a collapse of civil military institutions, civil military control in Germany. And this is very problematic. And we see something similar happening in France, I believe. I think that Macron likewise has seen the ship. He's moved in this direction, and he's committed to this, and committed to the concept of a Ukrainian victory over Russia. And he's looking around, and it isn't happening. So he's basically telling Europe, you got to grow a pair. Sorry to go that direction. You have to, man up and do something. You're cowards if you don't want to deploy your troops to Ukraine. He's talking about deploying not NATO troops, but troops from NATO nations who are entering into, their own unilateral security agreements with Ukraine, to send troops there to relieve Ukrainian troops who are currently not on the front lines, maybe guarding the Belarusian border, maybe digging in around Kiev, to release them to go to the front line, because Ukraine has a manpower emergency right now. Zelensky has just come out and said we're 700,000 men short. Where'd they go? I don't know. They're all dead, but they're 700,000 men short. And they only have 200 to 300,000 men available for the front lines right now, and that's not enough. And they're losing men at thousands a day right now, and and they've got nothing to hold the Russians back. So they need manpower right now. And so Macron, having moved his ship into the ship of states, moving in this direction, all that momentum, Macron doesn't want to hit the brakes or turn around, because that makes France look bad. So Macron is saying, in order to maintain this momentum, we have to do something that keeps Ukraine viable. Ukraine needs manpower. That's their number one pressing issue right now, manpower over everything else. And the easiest way to get manpower is to basically put foreign troops in to, not in a frontline combat capacity, but in a rear area support capacity, to relieve Ukrainian troops who can then go to the front lines. The irony is, all you're going to get out of that is 60,000 troops. You're not going to get any more than that. but that's better than nothing. That buys time to, maybe Ukraine can come up with a magic mobilization scheme, which they can't do. But Macron is committed to this, and so the French ship is moving, the German ship is moving, the American ship is stopped, and America now literally, we're in a situation where our national security has been hijacked by France and Germany because they're doing things that, if they are implemented, commit us to a war that we don't want to fight. And the other thing about this is the American people understand we do have something called the Constitution. Congress is the only body capable of declaring a war. We're not at war with Russia right now. We're going to be at war if France keeps doing what they're doing and Germany keeps doing what they're doing. We're going to be at war, but it's a war that hasn't been discussed by Congress. Has Congress voted on this to declare war? The President of the United States, of course, can commit American troops under the War Powers Act, but only in a situation where we've been attacked and it's a pressing issue, and he doesn't have time to notify Congress. But has the president said, this is what we want? We want to support this? No, the president's saying the exact opposite. We don't want a war. We don't want American troops there. But the American people are ignorant of this. And we're going to wake up one day thinking that, well, it's okay. There can't be a war with Russia because Congress hasn't declared war and the president isn't articulating warlike. In fact, he just fired Victoria Nuland. So clearly we're not going to war with Russia. We're going to go to war with Russia if France and Germany keep going in this direction because it's inevitable. And that means that we've allowed foreign entities to hijack congressional processes, constitutional processes. This is a very dangerous situation for America, for Americans, for the world, to be honest. But I don't think most Americans understand how bad things are. You should be calling your representatives, your senators, and demanding that there are hearings about the potential of war with Russia. And is this what we want? Do we want a war with Russia? Because that's what we're getting. And if we don't want a war with Russia, what are we doing to distance ourselves from French actions and German actions? If I were the president of the United States, I'd be calling up Emmanuel Macron and saying, we won't support you. If you put troops in there, we will publicly distance ourselves from you. And we'll tell the Russians that there will be no Article 5 protection for not only the French troops on the soil in Ukraine, but for France. Meaning that if you take this decision, that means that France is now at war with Russia and you're on your own. You get no NATO protection. Russia, you're free to just take them out. We don't like them anyways. Germany, the same thing. Sorry, Germany, but if you put the Taurus missile in there and you attack the Crimea Bridge, you're at war with Russia. We're not. You don't get Article 5 protection. We're not riding to your rescue, and Russia has permission to destroy you. We need to do something like that to put these two nations on notice, indeed to put all of NATO on notice that there will be no war with Russia. The only way there's a war with Russia if Russia attacks NATO, and we should make this very clear. When it's therefore we need Secretary of Defense Austin to stop saying that if we don't win in Ukraine, there will be a war with Russia.
Yep.
Well, there won't be unless Russia attacks NATO, which Russia isn't going to do. So what Austin should be saying is we need to bring an end to this Ukrainian conflict so that there's no risk of Russia attacking NATO. But Russia is not going to attack NATO. It's an artificial thing. But if we continue to lean forward like that, remember, what lean forward means that we're getting NATO to create domestic, political, diplomatic, economic, and national security momentum. It's very difficult to turn around. We need to bring these giant container ships to a halt, and then we need to slowly turn them and move away from the direction of war.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.